Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zach Kacharski. I'm the executive editor at the Gazette, and I want to welcome you to Iowa Ideas in Depth Week. And I'd like to thank you for taking time to join us today. This is the conclusion of our in-depth week focused on workforce. And so today we're going to be talking about marketing Iowa from an array of different perspectives. And so we'll have a pretty round robin approach. I would like to begin by introducing the panelists, and I will allow each to introduce themselves because they'll do this better than I will. And so today we are joined with Lydia Brown, Claudia Shabo, Courtney Reyes, and Chris Dybel. And so I would like to begin, Lydia, I'll have you go first. You're to the left of the Hollywood squares on my screen, and you could start with introducing yourself.
You bet. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity, Zach. My name is Lydia Brown, and I am with Skogman Commercial Realty. I am part of the Tiffany Earl Williams team. And in addition to my day job, I have served as the chair of ICR Iowa Board, which is the regional economic development group, which is a collaborative effort between ICAD and the Cedar Rapids Metro Economic Alliance. So I appreciate being here and very excited about talking about bringing people and companies to the area.
All right, Claudia.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Zach, for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here. I am the CEO and president of Shabo Solutions, which is a consulting firm around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in other words, we serve as a strategic partner in helping organizations build an inclusive workforce and workplace. Happy to be here. And happy Hispanic and Latinx Heritage Month to all.
Thank you. And Courtney.
Hey y'all, my name is Courtney Reyes. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the executive director of One Iowa. We are the state's leading LGBTQ organization advocating and educating folks all across the state to improve the lives of LGBTQ Iowans. I also sit on the Greater Des Moines Partnerships Inclusion Council, where we spend a significant amount of time making sure employers are seeing all of the different folks that are in their community and how they can best serve those individuals. Happy to be here.
All right. And Chris, you continue the trend of interesting Zoom backdrops. Can you please introduce yourself?
I mean, I wish I had the mailboxes. Those are the coolest.
They are.
My name is Chris Dybel, and I'm the Director of Public Affairs for the Iowa Business Council, and we represent 22 of Iowa's largest employers across the state. And then as my side job is also, I own a restaurant here in Des Moines called Bubba. So I kind of get to span large employers as well as understand small employers as well.
All right. Well, thank you to each of you for joining us today. And we'll jump in and start with some questions. And if there are questions to submit, you can participate as well by putting them into the chat at the bottom of your screen. And we will work those in to the conversation as well. I thought that we could maybe start with a little bit of a generic opener as we look at the state's workforce. Each day it seems like workforce shortages and labor shortages are at the top of the list of concerns. And there's a lot of marketing going on for people. And there's, I think, maybe there's some competition going on to lure people from different organizations to other organizations. And so it's certainly a little bit of a buyer's market or the employees market in terms of where you're going. And I'm curious, as you go in and you see some of the different messages that are out there, both for recruiting employees and as you go into it of the image that the state has. What do you think the message of Iowa or some of the regions is today, and what do you think the opportunities are in terms of maybe some tweaks to that message? And Chris, I figure I would start with you. You're living in both worlds, both from the collective of a lot of major businesses, but then at the restaurant space as well. Oh, and Dan, yep. Okay. Well, Dan, could you work to unmute Chris, please? Thank you.
Perfect. Sorry about that, gang. Yeah, from a workforce position, jobs are incredibly thin, right? And we have to do everything that we can to market ourselves in the urban, suburban, and rural quality of life spectrum. We have really, I think, strong ways and authentic ways that we can do that. There are lots of jobs available in every sector, and that should be part of our pitch, right? We've got lots of opportunity. I think there's an assumption that all of these jobs that are available are low paying, and that's just not the truth. There are jobs in every sector that are great jobs here in Iowa. And so when you balance that with the fact that we're a great place to raise a family, great work-life balance, it really is a land of opportunity. And so from our perspective here at the Iowa Business Council, we've just spent the summer doing a marketing campaign that targets our border states, 25 to 35-year-olds across our border states. We did live testimonials with folks across the state talking about why they want to live here, why they've enjoyed living here. And we were able to hit hundreds of thousands of people through that effort. Now those videos are living on at thisisiowa.com, which is a project of the Iowa Economic Development Authority. And they're able to use those open source materials as a ripple effect through their work that they're doing. So I think storytelling is definitely something we need to do, and that can be done at the official level, at the state level, but also as individuals across the community, regardless of the size of your business. Telling these authentic stories and explaining why Iowa is a great place to live is part of the equation.
Okay. Lydia, you work kind of in one of these places, the urban region that is on the growth list, and I'm kind of curious your thoughts in this perspective.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think that Chris is right. We have to sort of not just tell people, but show people that it's a great place to live. I think, one of the most difficult things about attracting individuals to this region is that we have historically not been great about, tooting our own horn, so to speak. And I think that I actually think Des Moines has done a better job than Cedar Rapids. We're working on it, certainly. But, we are looking at opportunities to attract businesses and individuals. And I think the reality is we have to broaden our viewpoint, the collective viewpoint of what a good business or a good job may look like. Because it's not going to look the same as it did 20 years ago. And I think that that's probably the hardest thing for people to get their head around. The employee is going to look a little bit different and the job is going to look a little bit different. And you were mentioning, earlier, Zach, about the ability to have warehousing certificates and looking at those jobs and I would say going, as far down as middle school and talking about jobs that are not necessarily traditionally considered to be a good job. And I think really helping to educate families, children and their parents, probably just as importantly, about the opportunities that are here and the quality of life and the cost of living. All those things equate to and add up to a great life, but we have to make sure that people understand how they get there. And I feel very fortunate in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area. We have grown, we are seeing growth, but it's not enough to sustain the new jobs that are coming in. And so we really need to attract more, and we need to really broaden that base of what that good employee looks like. I think that's really a critical piece of this.
And Claudia, I was going to come to you in terms of inclusion and an inclusive workforce. I mean, there's been a lot of effort to kind of what does the employee look like, and just in general. And I'm curious, as we're looking at how do you go about making Iowa appeal as an inclusive place to be?
Oh goodness, that's a loaded question, Zach. Let me just start from the beginning and really emphasize the importance of having language that is defining these terms very clearly to each one of the audiences that we're talking about. So when we talk about inclusivity, we need to understand for our organizations what that means. what that looks like, right? For some organizations, inclusive practices might be just the minimum requirement. And if you really want to impress a potential future workforce, then how are you going to ensure that you're doing more than the minimum requirements? So inclusivity has to be defined for each organization. And the same goes for that diverse workforce that we keep talking about. Unfortunately, Zach, in many of my conversations, the word diversity, it's still being defined by race and gender. And when you define it narrowly by gender and race, you're leaving a whole potential group or different sources of talent that should be part of the conversation. So when you think broadly about the topic of a diverse workforce, I am including not only gender diversity, but racial, ethnic diversity, but also people with disabilities, people that maybe are re-entering the workforce. We know that just last year, we had 2 million women leaving their jobs because of one reason or another. As they re-enter the workforce, what are we doing to include them or to equitably understand that they needed that pause, and that does not make them less qualified? Also, and Courtney will speak to this, but LGBTQ plus individuals, professionals, it's a tremendous source of talent, creativity that many organizations might not be very intentional and thoughtful about attracting them. So when you look at all the different groups, you have to be cohesive and you have to be strategic about understanding that some policies and practices might be favoring some groups more than others, and you have to be willing to understand what that means. But right now, from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, Zach, from a recruiting perspective, to me, the most important thing to do is to understand why we're having this great resignation. Why are people leaving your organization in the first place? Do you know the reason? And if you don't know the reason, before we go out there, I always tell this is my mantra. Before we invite people to the party, let's clean up the house a little bit. Let's ensure things are working properly, not only for Claudia, but for Courtney, for Chris, for Lydia, for all the people that might look differently.
Mm-hmm. All right, Courtney, I'd like to come to you. Last but not least, certainly, I'm curious your thoughts about, inclusion, and certainly we've had some conversation about policy and everything else that plays into kind of the perception of the state and people's willingness to be there. So I'm kind of curious your opening thoughts.
Absolutely. As I listened to everyone talk, I heard there's just hope in ways of we can get folks in. And then as a member of the LGBTQ community and someone who advocates for the community, it doesn't feel that hopeful. I hate to be the Debbie Downer of the crew, but we have a significant number of bills that have been continued to be introduced into our Iowa legislature, and we spend a significant amount of time stopping them from happening. But the sheer introduction impacts the quality of life and the safety of a big part of our population, whether you're in the LGBTQ community or you have kiddos that are in the LGBTQ community, that impacts your family and you don't feel safe. And so that makes you want to leave this state or to hunker down and not want to expand, because not only when you have an employee, like that's an employee of yours and you want them to be a happy, healthy individual because they're going to give you better work, you have a better return on your investment, but you also want them to thrive in their community. And I think it's a wide approach of how do we protect LGBTQ people, but how do we make workplaces safe enough for people to be able to be their best selves? We know that about 50% of Americans, LGBTQ Americans, are not fully out at work. So I hear time and time again, well, I don't have any LGBTQ people on my staff. And I say, that's just not true. They're just not out to you. Because you have to create that safety for folks to be willing to come out and share themselves with you. And we know that return on investment is there, that people, when they are their best selves, I've seen it in my own organization. We've taken the time to make humans a priority. And yes, you're an employee, but also we're surviving a global pandemic and a slew of bills that are coming after us. And if we ignore us as humans, we don't put out very good work. And so I don't want to say that as a selfish thing. Like, I want them to be good workers, but I also want them to work for me in a year from now. And you're investing in your employees. And where diversity, equity, inclusion, often I hear folks say, well, we just don't have the budget for that. I'm sure Claudia has heard that 1 million times. But if you want to invest in your employees, you have to invest in their quality of life and their quality of time that they're spending with your company, so we can keep them here. Otherwise, they're going to be looking for different jobs where they have that inclusive workplace where they feel seen, not only as an employee, but as a human being. And we're in an interesting time in our country, right, where people are challenging the thoughts of what does capitalism look like, and how do we improve our quality of life? And the pandemic has made us look at that, and so I feel like it just continues to bubble up. And that, I think, is a really cool opportunity for all the people who are doing this work, because that gives us a chance to make an impact and for companies to make a really good change.
Well, and we've already had the conversation of, attracting kids at middle school. And so the perception of the state and the perception of place, I mean, that absolutely starts, something that they're looking around with at that point too.
Yeah. But if you're a kiddo who is going to middle or high school and you watch your legislators write 10 bills that target you specifically as a trans kid, why would you ever want to invest any sort of time or energy into this state?
Yeah.
Like, you don't feel like you can get a job here because you feel like somebody's trying to erase your being. And so we really feel like it's a multi-pronged approach if we have to stop that from happening and build inclusive workplaces.
Mm-hmm. And may I just jump in, Courtney, and hats off to you and your organization for speaking so clearly and loudly about this topic of legislation, because what I have experienced last year and this year trying to advocate myself against those legislations is that I found the business community to be very hesitant. And they could not see this very clear connection between taking care of our own and recruiting for the next future workforce. So if we are not speaking up against legislations that are hurting the kids, hurting the people that are already here, how can we stand for a positive message for attracting people that are not here yet? There's a disconnect there.
Yeah, I do want to shout out there are some businesses that have stood up against this harmful legislation. The Iowa Business Council being one of those. I love seeing Chris on this call of that saying, like, this is not okay. And we have to make that connection, because if I'm at the Capitol waving my pride flag, it's like, yeah. Okay, girl, that's your cause. But when the Iowa Business Council shows up and says, our company says no to this, we don't want this, that has a huge impact. And so we've spent the last 3 years building out those relationships, but it's slow because folks are worried of, what about customers? What will people think? But I was in a meeting just yesterday and someone said to me, you don't have 100% of the customers anyway. So so you're going to lose a few, right? But you're also going to gain so many by standing up for human rights. We're not asking for extra. We're just asking to be protected. So I love those connections, and just thankful for the businesses who have continued to make an impact. And we're always looking to recruit more people to stand up with us as we build out this business coalition. But yes, it's scary, absolutely, to say yes to that.
And as Courtney alluded, the Iowa Business Council did come out very publicly and say that non-inclusive bills are bad for the attraction and retention of talent, period, full stop. Young people can live anywhere they want anymore, especially with remote work options. So, from our perspective, the sales pitch for Iowa is strong when it comes to cost of living and work-life balance. But we're undermining all of those talking points when we allow bad bills to go as far as they go. And thankfully, they haven't gotten to the end of the road yet. And folks like Courtney and others have worked so hard to to make sure of that. But local community and business leaders need to engage in tough conversations before session starts to make sure that all parties are aware of the ripple effects that these non-inclusive bills have on growth for not just their town and their region, but the entire state. People are watching, this stuff lives on the internet, and just the mere mention of these things can be bad for business and bad for obviously the people that Courtney was just advocating for.
Chris, I'm curious, did it get easier as, did members, want to be more vocal about this as others start to stand up? What is it like in that room of, okay, who is standing up?
I've been really heartened by the fact that executives across the state really are working very hard on this issue, both publicly, again, when they send our team out to advocate and fight against these things, but also, the folks that are walking the walk and talking the talk in their individual companies. I think we're seeing more and more of that across the state. And at the Iowa Business Council, we work with larger employees. A lot of those folks have a global reach. And so they're seeing things well beyond their individual communities. I think the next step is to make sure that those messages trickle down to medium and small size companies and make sure that they're understanding the implications of these things as they move forward each session. And hopefully, Courtney has less and less work to do on this issue in the coming years, right? Because everybody continues to learn a little bit more and understand a different perspective.
Now, I am curious a little bit, Chris, when we opened, you talked about, marketing to neighboring states, kind of the contiguous states. And I'm curious, what is the logic there? Because, is it, if you have an experience, you're close enough to arrive here or visit that, that's the connection start? Or what is that thinking?
Well, first and foremost, everybody has a budget, right? So part of that just had to do with budget constraints. And so when we worked with an agency as well as our partners at the Iowa Economic Development Authority, what we learned is that the low-hanging fruit, if you will, is our border states. The folks that are most likely to move here are most likely to come from a state that we touch. And a lot of them are boomerangs, right? A lot of them have made the decision to go live in Chicago or Minneapolis, and they wanted to get out and see a little bit of the world outside of Iowa. And now maybe they're ripe for coming back and appreciating the quality of life things that Iowa has to offer at a lower price point. And so that was the thinking with this particular campaign. It was a 90-day campaign. It lived on social media. It was video testimonial. You can visit the Iowa Business Council social media threads and see those videos. And as I mentioned, they also live on thisisiowa.com. We made a point to pick folks from different parts of the state. So there was more rural people, there was more urban folks, and just telling that story a little bit and making sure that people had an easy way as they're scrolling through on their Facebook to kind of give Iowa another thought.
Lydia, I'm curious, with ICR and some of those efforts, obviously the University of Iowa, you've been working in this space as well. And I'm curious what you've seen in terms of recruiting the region.
Well, it's interesting, and something that Chris said sparked a thought for me. And what's happening is, the workforce shortage there isn't an area that is not dealing with workforce shortage, which is unique. It used to be that certain parts of the country were less or more flush with workers. Right now, across the nation, it's just a workforce shortage, specifically in service-based industries. We're seeing it in transportation. We're seeing it, there's certainly some sectors that you see it even more so. And I think what's happening is, there's going to be consolidation because if you can cut down even a few workers. So to Chris's point, looking at neighboring states as it relates to business attraction, or growth of businesses that are in this area, being able to attract some of those consolidation efforts into the state is certainly an opportunity. And I think being at the table, making sure that we're doing things like providing workforce training, making sure that everybody understands that and it's disappointing, to Courtney's point, to not feel as welcoming, because that's important. We got to make sure that it feels like a welcoming place, and they're going to be able to attract and retain the right workforce, because otherwise those efforts are going to go elsewhere. Certainly expanding is a critical piece of this, and without workforce, even local companies are a little bit hesitant to expand in this area. So we have to be sure that we really are keeping on top of that. So I think that I'm a huge believer that you have to be constantly attracting people and the talent that they bring, their families, and you also have to keep attracting businesses, whether it be businesses to grow or businesses that are new to the area. But the best way that we can do that is by providing an educated workforce or having the training available to those individuals so that they can be productive the minute that those companies grow. I think it's it's just a critical piece of the equation. And certainly looking at inclusive ICR and the work that Quinn and her team have done to ensure that companies understand that we have to be inclusive in order to be even successful with what we have, much less grow. I think it's really been an important part of the ICR story.
I would just add that, our small marketing efforts will certainly not do this alone. We have to make a bipartisan effort at immigration reform. The fact is, our population is not growing at the rate that it should, and no marketing budget is going to fix that. We need help with legal pathways to come here. And that is everything. That's not just the service sector, that's health, that's rural, it's urban. We need to be able to legally attract immigrants to Iowa if we're going to grow at the rate that we need to grow. Otherwise, businesses are going to look elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I just want to also mention, Zach, is there have been pilot programs done where English as a second language become part of the training. And they've been very successful. Now, they've certainly been slowed down with COVID, which is really disappointing to me because we were seeing some real progress with that. I attribute really Kim Betchika and Kirkwood, and now I know Jasmine Almoyed will continue it on. But looking for ways to assist with whether it be the refugee population, the immigrant population, that's a group of individuals that are very, they desire to become part of the workforce. And we have a real opportunity, but to Chris's point, we've got to make sure that we are, again, welcoming them and creating pathways for their success, because that's the only way it's going to be ubiquitously successful.
Chris, I'm curious from that kind of the employers behind the scenes, if there are some bright spots that you see in terms of bipartisan opportunity for immigration reform. Are there some spots you're starting to see or some partners that may have some innovative ideas in the space?
Our members are actively meeting with elected officials on both sides of the aisle, having those conversations. We just had some a few weeks ago, and making it very clear that this is a priority for companies across Iowa. I am hopeful that those solicitations are truly heard and that there will be some effort around that. It's frustratingly slow, I think, for a lot of people who care about this issue. In the short term, I do think that there is a lot of bipartisan support for helping folks coming over from Afghanistan, and hopefully that'll be a really positive, bright spot that people that can extrapolate into future efforts, because I think a lot of people are understanding that there were heroes over there that helped our our military, and hopefully we can take that positive outreach and grow it. But it is frustrating how slow some of this is taking. If you're a rural company and you're trying to promote, I mean, you're not just trying to promote in your town, you're taking a 30, 45-minute radius around your company and trying to hire anyone you can. It is very clear to these individuals that are at the top that they've got to grow their populations. There's only so much you can draw from a realistic radius, and so we are consistently looking at those efforts. We're corresponding with our folks at the state and federal level to make sure that everyone understands that this is not a partisan issue. This is a workforce issue. This is an Iowa issue.
We've seen the trend, happen for decades in the census data, where there's a migration from the smaller rural communities into the urban centers, and that continues to play out. Are there some ideas or in terms of reversing course on that? It's a difficult trend, and I'm mindful, we hear all of the time, well, you're in the region rich area where everybody wants to be, and they move there. And so, but that comes at the expense of some of the more rural communities. I'm curious, are there some opportunities at that, town square level that we're seeing that, one of the things I'm touched by is some of these efforts are very small. They start with the, Lydia, to your point, ESL, and if you can do that with a small group, you can get them going. Are we seeing some of that start to bubble up anywhere? Are there places we should be looking at?
Were you asking Chris?
I would open it to anyone who has been.
Well,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
The only thing that I can tell you is that I know a couple of years ago, and so the data, of course, is now completely not redundant, but it's hard to look at the past 24 months and think that anything before those 24 months is valid, right?
Still
because
matters,
the world has changed. But at one point we were looking at that because ICR covers a 7-county region. And while Johnson and Lynn certainly are more urban, the rest of the other 5 counties, and certainly parts of Johnson and of Lynn, are considered rural. So, and the challenge was, what we were seeing is that it had hit a plateau to a certain extent of drawing into those urban areas. Des Moines would be the outlier in that across the state, Des Moines and the surrounding areas. But, you kind of hit that tipping point where you really couldn't take too much more from the rural areas without the rural areas starting to fail, just because of numbers, just because of the realities of numbers. And so we'd sort of seen a bit of a plateau. Now, I don't know what's happened since pandemic. It'll be interesting to see, probably in 2021, a study like that will be looked at again. But, it is a problem, and it is a problem that we don't have a great solution for. And by the way, just by taking from rural communities, it's not enough to sustain the urban communities with the job growth that we'd like to see. So we really have to figure out either how to utilize more of the population that we have, which is the easiest way, or to attract additional individuals and families into the area in order to be able to sustain that growth, because we sort of plateaued. There's just not much more that you can't keep pulling.
And there's an interesting chicken and egg here, right? And I think, Claudia, you were the one that had the great analogy of, before you have people over, you tidy up your house. And I love that line, because we've done some great things at the state level in the last year around rural broadband and affordable workforce housing that are going to be great infrastructure settings for the next step. But then the next step really is creative placemaking and quality of life things, the intangibles that make some place exciting to live, right? So I think about the work that the community of Pella has done, where they've actively recruited and helped fund a restaurant in their town square because they knew that they were hearing from talent and that they couldn't really necessarily always see themselves living in a small town like that. So they wanted to proactively get in front of that. They're bringing in a specialty market. They're developing a whole living community, building homes to make sure that they address their workforce housing issue. Those are some cool things. And you look up at Fairfax, and they had an issue with childcare, and they did a public-private partnership with their employers there, and they built their own childcare facility. In Sheraton, they're taking existing housing stock and between high school students who are learning how to flip homes and a fund that the Hy-Vee folks have put together, they're helping to bring their existing housing stock back to a point of pride. So I think there are ways that we can tackle these issues, and it's not which one comes first. In my mind, it truly is, how can we do as many of these things simultaneously as possible? Because we do need the meat and potato infrastructure stuff like housing and broadband, but we need to be thinking on what makes a community unique and why do people want to live there all at the same time. And I would say, just as a shameless plug to your team, Zach, that I think Marissa Payne and John Steppe are leading the way and covering some of these issues across the state. And I really enjoy reading that from afar. They're doing a great job of capturing those stories and pushing that narrative that really needs to be pushed.
Well, Chris, I just want to be clear to everybody, I did not pay you to say that.
You did not.
I appreciate that. But sticking with the theme of cleaning the house and doing the work internally, Courtney, I know you get, One Iowa has the Workplace Culture Summit that you've been doing. The next one is coming up in November. Yeah. What types of topics are you going to be addressing there? And I mean, if I can get lost in metaphors easily, but that seems like that's a place where if you're interested in cleaning the house, you can start there.
Absolutely. Yes, our Workplace Culture Summit, we're in our 5th year now, which is hard to believe, and it will be completely virtual. And we've been able to connect with folks, companies large and small across the state, and getting small businesses involved as well. And our theme this year is going beyond the pride flag. And so we all see companies on June 1 turn their logos to a pride logo, and then at 11:59:59, it flips back to that old logo, and they don't talk about LGBTQ people anymore. And we work all year long. It would be beautiful. I would love to work just during Pride Month. But we continue and need that support, and LGBTQ people need support in your workplaces. And so we're going to be focusing on trans and non-binary folks in the workplace, lesbian, gay, bisexual folks. We have a lot more power and privilege and than our trans and non-binary individuals. And so how are we creating space for them to really grow and thrive in workplaces? Claudia said it earlier, like this is a group of individuals that we have a lot to offer to our state, but we have to be able to be seen, to be able to show up and do that really great work. We're also going to be focusing on DEI best practices for your work groups. A lot of folks have developed DE&I groups in the past year or two, especially since the murder of George Floyd. And so we want folks to do that in a sustainable way, like not just like, let's do something that makes us feel good, but how do we make an actual change in our organization to support not only LGBTQ people, but Black and Brown and Indigenous folks and folks with disabilities. Like the list goes on. And these are folks that make up your workforce. So how do you support them in a sustainable way? One of the things I'm most excited about is having hard conversations. That's going to be one of our topics, because people like feel in their gut, and like, so I can sleep at night. I believe that we have the numbers for good, that people want to make change, but it's scary and it's uncomfortable. And so we're going to talk about how do you take those actionable steps to make change in your workplace. And then we're also focusing on our community. Like Chris said, like people not only need a place to have a job, but they need to be able to feel welcome in their community. And so, yes, there needs to be markets, but they need to be behaved well, and they need to be able to show up at the grocery store and feel like they're not going to be discriminated against. And so we're asking folks in companies and corporations to take that, yes, fund our organization, also encourage your employees to do the work outside of your organization so they can grow and thrive outside of there. So that is happening on November 3rd and 10th and December 1st and 8th. And it's a 2-hour session each week. We promise to deliver some really amazing topics. And so I hope you all will join us. Shameless plug here. Of course, I'm happy to do that. But it's a really great conference just to get people engaged and to think about how they can do that work inside. And so you can walk the talk as well and not just turn your logo to a pride color scheme.
Well, and Claudia, just, kind of in this space as well, in terms of, you've done quite a bit of work with smaller businesses, the mom and pop type shops. And I'm curious, how those efforts go. And then in terms of changing the story and some of those storytelling pieces to build a more inclusive workforce.
Yeah, great question, Zach. Would it be okay if I just start with giving a little bit of background information about myself?
Absolutely.
Because all the conversation that we have heard makes me so happy. I love that Chris talked about immigration. Actually, my journey personally started with this immigration conversation. My family relocated from Brazil to Japan because Japan in early 1990s, I know some of you might not be even remember that, maybe you're not even born then, was having a labor shortage, much like the conversation we're having here today. And what they had to do was to say, where are we going to find this talent? Because we're not growing as a population. And they decided that they were going to go to Brazil, government to government, and say, we're going to open the doors to individuals that can show that they have some type of lineage with the Japanese population. So my stepfather was the second generation of Japanese, and that's how my whole family relocated to Japan. And I lived in Japan for 5 years, and I worked in a factory for 5 years. So those are drastic measures, but that's what allowed Japan to grow in the 1990s and become a superpower from a manufacturing perspective. Sounds maybe a little bit out of the box, but that's my experience. And that's how I ended up here in Iowa, because I met my spouse in Japan. Now, I also started my career in diversity, equity, and inclusion from a workforce perspective. But we forget that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're talking about 3 strategic areas and pillars, which is workforce, workplace, and marketplace. Often when we start this conversation about workforce, because it's so complex, it takes so much of our time and our energy, we forget to pay attention to workplace and marketplace. So by default, when we talk about recruiting a workforce, we are being reactive, right? In many instances, we want the job filled yesterday, and we have already a job description. And what I'm asking our clients to do is to rethink, reimagine the future, the type of culture, the type of employee, the type of people they actually need. I do have this personal conflict with the term of labor shortage, because I personally know that there are people that have been underemployed for decades of their lives, and they would do anything to find a better job, but they can't. So when we say labor shortage, I totally understand that we look at our population growth and we do our math and we understand what's happening. But I also think it's a question of redefining talent and including more people in what we think is acceptable and meets our standards. So rethinking your standards for who you're hiring, how you're attracting that talent is number one in our practices. Before the pandemic, we used to say untapped talent. And I always thought it was an interesting term as well, because we didn't think about really tap talent until we need it. So why don't we step back and be much more strategic about really reaching out to all different demographics right now? And then we talk about that theme of cleaning up the house. Don't only start with workforce. Make sure that if you are going to put the effort in, that when you hire someone, that you're increasing the odds that they're going to stay with you. So that retention piece is equally important. And that comes down to infrastructure. It comes down to what are your benefits, what are the things you're doing, but also mainly your culture, your workplace culture. How healthy is your workplace culture? We might like the idea, we might understand that we might need to have someone like Claudia working right next to me, but if that understanding is not translating into inclusive behaviors, it's very likely that Claudia might not have the quality of friendships or relationships she would like to have. And that is actually one of the number one reasons why people are leaving the workplace today, given the SHRM and McKinsey surveys, 2 independent surveys. They have found that out of the survey respondents, 40% of the people that were surveyed decided that in the next 3 to 6 months, they're going to be leaving their current jobs. They don't even have a job that they're already lining up. They're going to leave without having another job. So it's interesting to me that when you look at the reasons that they're leaving, yes, pay, benefits, play a major role in retaining workforce. But what they're saying is that they don't have a great relationship or a sense of belonging in their organization. They don't have a great relationship with their managers or with their colleagues. So there is an opportunity there, I think, for all businesses of all sizes to take stock of what they're doing to create a culture that will attract and retain their talent.
Lydia, I'm curious. You are, with Skogman, you have the, you're recruiting people, businesses to the region, and I'm curious, the long-term play here of if we don't solve some of the workforce challenge that we have, how difficult does that make the conversation of recruiting? I mean, off air, you talked about being extremely busy, but I would imagine that if this becomes a perennial issue, does that job get tougher?
It absolutely does. I think what's interesting is, what's one of the unique perspectives that I have as we sit here is, prior to getting into real estate development, I owned a recruiting firm for 15 years. So one of the things that has always struck me as is just such a missed opportunity is, Chris has CEOs in these large companies understanding this reality that we are living with. But for most employees, their manager is the person that they perceive to be the company. And so if it is not trickling down amongst all of the management team and even individuals, because to Courtney's point, if they're not comfortable sitting at the table with a group of people because they feel as though they don't belong, it doesn't really matter what the CEO is saying. It matters what the individual is living and breathing when they're in that role. And so for business attraction, everybody looks for a reason to say no, because companies are looking at the best place to locate, whether it's to expand a business or to create a new organization. And if we give them reasons to say no, that's all they need to walk away. And it can be one reason. And we certainly have lost opportunities because of a lack of workforce. I think we're doing a better job of helping companies understand how we will get that workforce to come to play. But one of the things I think it's interesting, not every company has trouble finding people. And I think that one of the things that would be very interesting is for those companies that are not as starved for employees, they're doing something right. And they're doing something that maybe other organizations aren't. And I just think that we sometimes, the easy answer is, oh my gosh, I can't find anybody, or people won't stay in their jobs, or I can't afford to pay XYZ. I mean, we did a number of exit surveys many, many years ago, and the number one reason was that they did not feel valued. An individual did not feel valued in the role that they were playing. And I would bet a lot of money that the exact same thing is true, that the reason that people are leaving is not because they can make, $10,000 more somewhere else, but because they want to be valued, and because that who they are as an authentic individual is valued within that company. So I think that is it's a hard thing for a lot of organizations to swallow, because it's a hard thing to get everyone within the organization to do. It's a lot easier to have, a soundbite. But I will tell you, at some point, it will be the tipping point for an organization if we are not successful in converting, whether it be underemployed individuals, unemployed individuals, or returning to work individuals, plus attracting new people to the market, because there will be a point at which it will inhibit us to attract new businesses.
And Lydia, just to that point, I mean, it kind of hammers home some of the points that Courtney made earlier on about feeling valued and feeling seen and respected. And so if you're that middle schooler, it's not all that different than the reason somebody later in life opts to leave a company. And so the way it's just interesting there. I know we have just a couple minutes left. Chris, I'm really curious. We're seeing a lot of businesses here, in the hospitality industry with the restaurants, really changing their patterns. You're in the unique world of living in the policy space and, proprietor of a restaurant. I'm curious what the experience is. And I'm curious, as you start to see, workforce is changing a lot of businesses, the days that they're open and other things. What has that been like to live through, and how are you applying some of, the policy hat that you wear to what you're doing as an owner?
Well, as you can imagine, I'm listening to about every podcast I can on this topic, and I'm in constant communication with the leaders on the ground who are living this every day at the restaurant. Our restaurant is still experiencing a major workforce shortage. We pre-pandemic were a team of about 40. We need to hire 8 to 10 more people to get back to that level. So we're still on reduced hours. We're totally closed on Mondays. Previously, we were a 7-day-a-week operation. We're closing earlier every night at 9 o'clock rather than 10 during the week and 11 on the weekend. And a big part of that is making sure that we don't burn out the people who are currently working for us and that they have time to breathe and be with their families. So we're looking at that from a couple different areas. Obviously, one is compensation. Pre-pandemic, a lot of the hourly jobs in the kitchen would have been somewhere between $13 and $16 an hour. Today, those jobs are 15 to 19. We're starting to see $20 an hour for certain skilled kitchen employees. So, as you can imagine, when the rates increase, so does the cost of food to the customer. So all of that stuff is constantly under scrutiny. We just did another round of menu price increases in the last month to help us do that. I think the biggest piece of this, when you think about what has happened, is a number of folks have been told for the last 18 months that they were disposable, that their job was disposable, and they took a break because of some of the rescue benefits, and they were able to pause and look at their life and think about if they were truly happy and if this was a passion or if they could do something else. And I think a huge chunk of that population left this industry altogether. And we are going to have to do a better job as we grow a new crop of talent in understanding why and how do we make that better, whether it's the work conditions and feeling valued as people discussed, whether it's doing a better job of telling the world and young people that you can have a great career in hospitality and changing some of the perceptions there. But also, we as customers have to understand that we play a role in that too. And when you're in a customer-facing job, it can be exhausting. And unfortunately, there's a growing number of people in this world that don't show grace to their neighbors. And so if you are being mistreated or treated as a servant day in and day out, and now all of a sudden every sector in the world is hiring, you've got choices you can make. And I think that we are reckoning with that as a hospitality industry, and only the strong are going to survive in some cases. So, for our organization, we always offered benefits. We always offered a 401k match, but that's not the norm for hospitality, especially with some of the smaller groups. So, I think smaller organizations are having to, catch up with the benefits that they pay. And frankly, in a lot of cases, they should catch up. And so I'm always intrigued by conversations around compensation and people's different opinions about that. Because yes, compensation matters. It will always matter. But there's this other piece that's more qualitative that, we are going to have to sit back and think about a little bit further and respond to. And it's probably going to be a little bit messy for the next year. And that's ultimately, I think, going to produce a better industry. But in the meantime, I hope that customers will show a little bit of grace as we figure it out, because this is not just like riding a bike. You don't just turn it back on and expect things to be just the way they were before the pandemic. There are growing pains here. And I think, hospitality will always be a dynamic, interesting, diverse place. But it's experiencing a major growing pain right now.
Well, and Chris, I don't think that hospitality is alone in that growing pain. I was talking to a pharmacy tech giving me a flu shot last night, and she's still a student and burnt out from the last 2 years of administering shots. And then the headlines we had this morning about healthcare workers and concerns about burnout there. So I think that, well made in terms of showing grace and kindness. I mean, that's, you don't want to be snarky with the phrase Iowa nice. You want it to be genuine and meaning something. And so we've seen a lot of snark with that in the last few months.
That's right.
Well, folks, I appreciate your time. We've come to the end of our hour together. And so thank you to the panelists, Lydia, Courtney, Christopher, and Claudia. Thank you for taking time and indulging me in a far-reaching conversation. I appreciate that. And for others who are out there, Iowa Ideas is coming up around the corner. So it's my turn to give a selfless plug. October 14th and 15th, and we'll be online. It's entirely free to participate. You just have to go to iowaideas.com and do so there. We're welcoming David Gould, Peggy Whitson, retired NASA astronaut, as well as Thomas Apt, who's been doing a lot in the space of urban violence. And so we're excited about those and more participating virtually online October 14th and 15th. So thank you for taking time to join us for this conversation. And thank you again to the panelists. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.